It was the moment that would forever change the gaming news landscape. On November 6th of 2023, the popular gaming news site The Escapist imploded. The Escapist YouTube channel, best known for Yahtzee Crowshaw's Zero Punctuation and other popular shows like Cold Takes and JM8's Design Delve, had been acquired the previous year by the Gamors Group. Now, Gamors, in its infinite wisdom, had set unrealistically high goals for their YouTube operation. And despite Nick Calandra, the editor-in-chief of The Escapist, having met them, they then unsatisfied set even higher thresholds. And now, when Nick pointed out that said goals would be impossible to reach, they fired him. Now, typically, my friends, this would be the end of the story, with a corporation getting away with having destroyed yet another news site, and the internet just moving on. But in a Spartacus moment, the rest of the video content team and most of editorial quit in solidarity. They then, with Nick, created Second Wind, which as of this video already has 400,000 subscribers, and it's barely 2 months old. So, a happy ending with all threads tied up, right? Well, not exactly. You see, that's only part of the story. The Escapist had imploded in a big way once before, when it had pushed out its original founder. That man's name is Alex Macris. Alex is the guy who created the gaming format on YouTube as we know it today. He had been pushed out of his own company back in 2014 due to that unnameable scandal some of us like to call Gamergate. And until this video, no one has ever sat down with Alex to let him tell his story. And so, in this 2-part special series of CultureScape, we will explore the history, origins, and destiny of the Escapist. In this video, part 1, we will interview Alex, and we will explore how the Escapist came to be, how gaming YouTube as we know it proliferated, and why the gaming news format, unfortunately, might soon become effectively dead. This is CultureScape, and thank you for watching. Welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geeks that built modern nerd culture. Today I'm here with Alexander Macris, one of the most influential people in gaming over the last 17 years, and maybe a name you may have heard, but many of you probably haven't, and there's a very awful reason for that. Macris is the founder of the popular gaming news and culture website, The Escapist. He was a major early player in gaming YouTube. He hired some of his most influential voices who are still around, Jim Sterling for one. He worked with extra credits. There's Yahtzee, of course, who many of us enjoy. Many a write-up was written about his fabulous success until he had the temerity to say during the 2014 Gamergate situation that perhaps labeling all gamers as haters was just a bad idea. For that, he got pushed out of his own company. Much of his writing was purged, and in some ways he was unpersoned. So Alex turned around and went to go and create where he could. And he did so fabulously, especially in tabletop RPGs and making comics, where he's found strong success with projects like Ascendant, alternatives to modern politically tinged superhero stories. Today, I hope to go through all of this, of course, his interesting background in law and much more. Welcome, Alex, to the program. I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but you're an interesting guy. So I felt like
Thanks, that's very kind.
The build-up was worth it. Okay, so Alex, thank you for coming on the show. It is greatly appreciated. Let's get a bit into your background. How did you get into loving the nerdy things that you love? Kind of tell me maybe a little bit about your childhood. What kind of led your interest into geek culture?
Yeah, sure. So my love of geek culture, I think, started as early as I can remember. When other kids' parents were reading them books, Dr. Seuss and whatnot. My mom used to read me these ancient Greek myths and tales from this book called Mighty Men about Achilles and Caesar and Beowulf. I was named for Alexander the Great. My brother was named for William the Conqueror. Both my parents were fantasy and science fiction fans. By age 5, my older brother had taught me to play Dungeons and Dragons. So I effectively don't ever remember a moment in my life when I wasn't a fan of all things nerdy. And I'm sure that's probably warped my worldview in all sorts of terrible ways, but there it is. So I guess I just had it in the blood.
That is fair. I had maybe not that nerdy, but pretty similar background growing up too. It's just something I've always been very comfortable with. So you have an interesting background in where you started. If I have it correct, you actually started your career in education in the field of law. Is that right?
Kind of. I actually started it at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. My initial plan was I thought I'd join the military as an armor officer. Um, and so I went to West Point. I was there for my plebe year, my yearling year, and then my cow summer. It's third year summer, and then I resigned. At West Point, they talk about the three-legged stool, which is supposed to be perfectly balanced, and it's your military, your academic, and your physical components of your performance. And academically, I was in the very top 5% of the class. Militarily, I was average. Physically, I was 916 out of 1,000. And so I just had this realization that I had picked a career I wasn't going to be any good at. If I had picked virtually any other career, I would have been at the top of my field, but I had picked a career where there was this really big component that I wasn't any good at. And I was always very achievement driven. So I said, well, this was a mistake. This isn't what I'm supposed to do with my life. So I left West Point and I transferred to Binghamton University, and I kept my major in military history. And what I learned when I graduated from Binghamton University is that nobody hires military history majors. So I went to law school, and I was fortunate enough to get into Harvard, and I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard, and took a job with Wachtell Lipton, which was at that time the highest paying law firm in the world, and immediately concluded I really hated law. So right around then, the dot-com boom was happening. And I remember I was sitting, actually, the real wake-up moment for me was when I was sitting in a classroom just prior to graduating. It was my last year, my last semester. And I was taking a course called Internet and Society because it was 2000, dot-com craziness is at its peak. Mm-hmm. And we have this guest professor for the day, a guest lecturer. And it's a 20-year-old kid who founded RagingBull.com. And I don't even know if RagingBull.com was around anymore, but back then, it was a big website for stock investing. It had gone public. And so this 20-year-old kid is just telling us how awesome it is to be a 20-year-old dropout who's, a multimillionaire because he founded RagingBull.com. And I'm like, what are the opportunities for lawyers in the internet economy? And he says, oh, yeah, I hire lawyers all the time. I just had this realization. If I was going to be an attorney, I was always going to be the guy on the other side of the table. I was never going to be the creative guy. I was just going to be the admin guy. I didn't want to do that. So I called up my brother, who was a software developer, and I'm like, we're starting a game company. He's like, great, what's it going to be? I'm like, it's going to be on the internet. Internet's going to be big for gaming. And that was literally how it began.
Okay, so 2000, your brother says, all right, let's do it. So what was your first foray into working into the internet? Well, what was the game plan that you put together?
So the initial company was called Warcry, and it was an online game center. And the idea we came up with was that it was going to be a portal where developers could upload their games. They'd be available to play online or through digital download. There'd be a micropayment subscription. There'd be a micropayment system where you could purchase the games for small dollar amounts. There'd also be a subscription service. Each of the games could be reviewed by the users. There would be what at the time we called audience pull, which is the games that the audience liked most would get flushed to the front of the site. The games that the audiences didn't like would get hidden. It was essentially a very, very full-featured concept that didn't get implemented for another decade until companies like Steam actually went there, and companies like social media, companies in the social media space created various algorithms. Unfortunately, right after we raised our Series A funding, the dot-com crash happened.
Uh-oh.
And it was, absolutely brutal, and we couldn't get a second round of funding. So, the whole business plan had been built on build the prototype, then raise the second round of funding. And, I really remember trying to raise money from venture capitalists in, November 2000, early 2001. And they were like, look, this is crazy. No one's going to invest in video games right now. You're wasting your time. Ironically, I think had we gotten those the investors and I would have been, quite successful, but we didn't get it. I didn't pull the magic rabbit out of the hat. Didn't come together. So I had to shift focus.
That is amazing. The features because we see that exactly today. I think that, what is that phrase they say? One of the worst things you can do is being ahead of your time. That seems like the case for that project, but it's crazy because those ideas, they're basically standard, not just in gaming, but like Netflix or Amazon or streaming video. So that's fascinating to me. Okay, so how from that failure then? So that was about 2000, 2001, and you start Escapist 2005. Yeah,
that was at that point early 2001. So what we did was we said, well, we've assembled a little bit of a team that knows about games, and we really firmly believe that online gaming is going to be the future. And so we looked around and we saw that there was this emerging genre of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. At which point, at the time we started, there were three. There was Asheron's Call, Ultima Online, and EverQuest were dominating the market. And we thought, okay, this is going to be a really big space. There's going to be a lot more MMOs coming. But most video game companies functionally are boxed product companies. They put something in a box, they ship it out through retail, and then they move on to the next game. They're not structured around supporting an online service. And so we thought, what if we created a company that provided all of the service aspect related to online games? And that became Themis Group, which I founded in October 2001 with Jessica Mulligan as our first president. And we ran Themis Group, for many years thereafter. I mean, Themis ultimately was what owned The Escapist and is what got sold to Defy Media in 2012. So from 2001 till roughly 2005, I was an online game consultant, and I worked on about 40 different games, doing anything from design consulting to marketing consulting.
That is fascinating. You really were ahead of the curve. Holy cow! You just there's so many things you were just like, oh, this is going to be a big thing. That's going to be a big thing. And I guess at that point, it's just convincing other people that you're right. So, like, were there like any major titles during that time you're consulting on that you remember having that you really enjoyed or you had influence on?
Yeah, several. So, our first big client was Funcom. So, Funcom had released Anarchy Online, and it had gone disastrously, and they were just getting torn apart for the mistakes they were making. And so, we got hired on a 6-month contract to come in, teach Anarchy Online how to run an online service business, and kind of revise and improve everything. And we did great. And at the end of our contract, 6 months at the end of the contract, they won Game of the Year from PC Gamer, which no one would have believed on launch. And the former CEO of Funcom remains one of my best friends in the world. We've been friends for 20 years. So that was a huge win for us. That kind of put us on the map. Some other ones I really enjoyed working on. There was a project by a company called Neverax called Saga of Rhizome. And it was this marvelous MMO that had some really, really groundbreaking new features. Could do mass combats with, hundreds of avatars. It was totally zoneless, really unique world. And so we partnered with them and did a lot of work with Neverax. The problem that we ran into was that Neverax was heavily restricted by the French. They were a French company. They were heavily restricted by the French government in their ability to have their team work. So they could not pull crunch. They had to have mandatory vacations. And so the game kept getting delayed. And finally, when it launched less than a month before World of Warcraft. And World of Warcraft turned out to be so they didn't have time to cement a player base before World of Warcraft came out. And World of Warcraft, if you remember, it killed everything.
Yeah.
And so the rise of World of Warcraft and how absolutely dominant it became So what I realized is I said, I don't think there's going to be a long-term future in the Themis Group business because the games have network effects. The value of an MMO is partly determined based on how many other people are playing that MMO and understand the culture and understand why you're awesome to be epic level and so on. And so I realized it was going to be a winner-take-all business very much, and or at least mostly. You have some small games, but they would be orders of magnitude smaller. Like Eve is obviously successful, but it's an order of magnitude smaller than World of Warcraft. So I said, we have to pivot again. And at that point, some of our marketing contracts had done really well. We'd made some good friends. And so I went to those companies and I said, listen, if I start an online media company, will you pre-buy advertising? And they said yes. And so I raised the funds to start the Escapist from pre-selling advertising for the business that didn't exist from people who knew I was really good at marketing games. So then we launched the Escapist.
That's neat. And there's a quote I found that did survive the purge at Escapist from your stuff. A quote where you say that networking is a lot like tilling a garden, is that you have to plant a lot of seeds and you don't exactly know which ones will grow. But if you don't do that, I'm paraphrasing here, you will have nothing to reap. And that definitely seems to be with your career. Like, I have this idea, let's find a few people who like this, and then you get that ball rolling, as you find more success or you connect with people, you make those connections, and that kind of pulls you forward more and more. That's pretty good, like general career advice, I think, in general, like whatever field you're in.
Networking is hugely important. I mean, just as a silly example, you never know which moment or which event is going to be life-changing. One of the events that happened to us was at Game Developers Conference. We happened to know a particular game developer who had a crush on a PR rep that we happened to know at another company. And so we introduced them at a party, just like on a friendly basis, not realizing that game developer was actually going to then steer probably $1 million of business to us over the next 2 years. And it just, you can't plan for that, but you can take advantage of it.
So Escapist, there were some other game sites at the time, 2005. What did you want to do with Escapist that you felt you could do different than, say, other sites? IGN, of course, is a big one. That one's already around by 2005.
Well, if you go back and look at the state of game journalism in 2005, it was very much treating games from the point of view of consumer buyers' guides. Okay, so you had new game comes out, here's the game review. Before the game comes out, you have the preview, you have the trailer, you have the interview with the developer, and it's difficult to buy games. It's not easy at this point to get free demos, things like that. You still have to go to the store and purchase the game and install it. Not everybody wants to do that. So consumers were really going like, well, this is, this helps me decide which games to buy. And that was the, Metacritic becomes a big thing in this era. We looked at the space and we said, games aren't just consumer products. Games are to this generation what music was to the 1960s generation. They are the rallying point around which the whole culture is built. And nobody treats them that way. They get treated with total contempt. And so we said at the Escapist, we are going to be like Rolling Stone for gamers. We are Rolling Stone for the gamer generation. And our very first issue, issue one of the Escapist, because it was a digital magazine initially, so we did it as online digital magazine. Our very first issue was a man thrusting up a gamepad in front of like a massive audience, and it was gaming Uber alles, which today you could never get away with. It would be completely politically incorrect to even make a joke like that. But that was the day one, was we are going to take games seriously. We're going to take game culture seriously. Game design is an art, and this is an important medium that's going to change the world. And so we took the approach initially, no reviews at all, feature content only. We're not going to dirty our hands with reviews. Now, we ultimately changed that position because of market forces, but that was our initial launch goal, and that was what put us on the map.
It is interesting. I didn't know that about. I mean, I knew you guys started as a magazine form, but I didn't know that reviews was something you didn't want to deal with at the time. It is interesting to see how much. I mean, in some respects, even in game in gaming news, there is sometimes still that attitude that gaming is a lesser cultural touchstone than other things. But I think that has changed quite a bit since the mid-aughts.
It has, and we changed it, frankly.
Okay, so when did you feel like the Escapist was starting to get big? When did you feel like that ball started to roll? Because I kind of want to get into the Escapist success had and kind of move into how you got into the YouTube space, because you were a big influence in gaming YouTube as well.
That was when we really broke out big. So it's funny. This actually ties back in to the anecdote I gave earlier. So the game developer I mentioned one day sends me an email, and he's like, "Check out this hilarious video I found on Something Awful," and which was a big forum at the time for folks in the space. So I went and I watched the video, and it was this absolutely hilarious parody game review done by this fast-talking British guy. And I thought, this could be a whole show. And so I sent it to our acquisitions editor, and I said, "Hey, see if you can talk to this guy and put a deal together." And he hunted the guy down and found him, and he put a deal together. And so, boom, we had the show Zero Punctuation. And it was an instant hit. And the whole fast-talking YouTuber with animation, like, he started that. That was Yahtzee Crowshaw who began that whole trend, and a whole bunch of shows spawned off of that. And so what happened was, it became a very funny model at The Escapist. We used to liken ourselves to Playboy, because if you ran into someone at Game Developers Conference or E3 or something like that, they would always be like, "Oh man, I love you guys at The Escapist. You have the best feature articles. You really go in depth. You do the interviews. It's so good. I love the articles." But if you actually looked at the traffic, it was driven by the video. It was driven by Zero Punctuation. So we're like, we are basically Playboy magazine. Zero Punctuation is the centerfold, and then the articles wrap around it and give it respectability, so that he can go ahead and say, ridiculous swear words over and over and over again, and talk about triple-titted hookers and things like that. And we can still get ad funding somehow because we're respectable because of the articles. And that became our business model, which was, quite amusing to me.
Oh, and that was Yahtzee. I was just watching a video of his earlier today. He's a really interesting talent, and he just has a way with language, and I don't know. He was a good find. I still think he's a great. I mean, not everyone.
He's a comedic genius.
Yeah, even his odd book that he writes about bubblegum monsters taking over the world or whatever. They're pretty great too.
Yeah, no, he's a fantastic writer, comedic genius, and also I got to say, like, a really stand-up good guy. Like, absolute zero drama, always delivered on time, always did what he said he would do. Like, you literally, you're blessed a couple times in your career. You're gonna find talent like that and get to work with that. But he was one of them.
Yeah, and reliable from the sounds of it, which is like talent and reliability. Those seldom do those two cross. So there are other big names like Jim Sterling. He does not go by that name still. I forget what he goes by now. But did you find Jim Sterling, or because I think he might have had some stuff going on beforehand before he?
No, I didn't find Jim Sterling. Our acquisitions editor found Jim. I don't remember how he did. I think it might have been in our Escapist Film Festival, actually. So what we did is we started a film festival, the Escapist Film Festival, where video creators could submit their videos to us, and then the audience would vote on them, and then we had a final critical panel that would make the final selection, and then the ones that got selected got contracts with the Escapist. And so that started to help us, find new talent. The first show that came out of that was called Unskippable. Then later, I think that's where we found Jim Sterling, or it might have been direct. I don't remember. It's been 15 years at this point. But he was definitely one of our biggest creators for a long time. Yeah.
Well, some other names, and there's a bunch. Extra Credits, which did that start with you, or do you had a contract? But their work with Escapist, and they went on to just crazy big success on YouTube with all kinds of spin-offs.
Yeah. So we helped them launch. They launched on the Escapist. We worked with them initially. The creator and I had a falling out over T-shirts of all things, and so we released them from their contract and gave them back the rights to the show, and that was that.
So one of the things, we talked about extra credits. So one of the things that came up at the time with the extra credits thing was that, as popular as Escapist was, and this is kind of the dirty secret of internet media. As successful as Escapist was, there was reports, I don't know how accurate they were since I wasn't there, that though you guys were great in traffic, making money with a gaming news site is still a difficult balance to find. Can you talk any about that, or I don't want to make you uncomfortable or break any NDA.
Oh, you're not gonna make me uncomfortable when the companies don't exist. Yeah, it was brutally hard, and there were many moments when, either I or my business partner Tom were literally, putting the company's payroll on our credit card because we just didn't have funds come in, or begging our investors for additional funding because a major deal had fallen through. I mean, it was really dark. And what happened in part was that we hit our hyper growth just as the 2008 recession came in. And so just at the period when we really started to have our most traffic, literally the moment when everyone started to cut their budgets. Because when the 2008 recession hit, I don't know if you remember, but it was a game industry recession as well. People always said the game industry is recession-proof, but it turned out not to be. And what had changed was that by 2008, enough people were playing online games that they could just keep playing their games online, and they didn't need to go back to stores to buy new games. And so the game industry suddenly found itself no longer recession-proof. And so they cut all their ad budgets, and then that case got cascaded down to us, and it was brutal. We went through rounds of layoffs and rebuilding and layoffs and rebuilding. And so when we finally sold in 2012 to Defy Media, it was at that point for me a welcome relief because the stress had aged me greatly.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about media, because people look on the outside and they think, well, it must be so fabulous, because you get so much traffic, people are talking about you, but that does not necessarily turn into sales or into usable revenue. It is the oddest thing that the people that kind of drive the internet or have such an impact don't make nearly as much money as you think. That sometimes it's like for like someone that even is running a site, it's a crazy difficult balancing act. You have so many people you're trying to take care of. You want to reward people who do well. You're trying to make it so people have something kind of like, for lack of a better term, a living wage. You're trying to do right by people, but it's just like making the numbers work is so much harder than I think people realize. It's to the point that I've heard many people in recent years, especially now after we've had this year with like what happened with Vice and all the layoffs we saw at places like Fama, they're like, maybe we're just going to have this understanding that gaming news sites to exist are just not going to be all that profitable. And maybe this is going to be something that we'll just have to rely on being like this is almost like a nonprofit institution. This is more like a charitable institution. We have this here for the good of like a local paper. Right. This is here for the good of the people, but we're not expecting to make money on that. So when Defy Media came to you and they're like, we want to buy you out, were you pretty enthusiastic at that point? What did your partners think of the offer?
Oh, it actually didn't go that way. We hired investment bankers to sell us. So the investment bankers approached Defy. It wasn't the other way around. What had happened was that in 2008, we first hired investment bankers. And we were very, very close to a deal to sell The Escapist to Condé Nast. Chris Anderson, who was the editor-in-chief of Wired, was a big fan of the site, and he recommended they purchase us, and the vice president of editorial that I was going to report into recommended we purchase us. And I figured, okay, I'm about to sell to Condé Nast. Like, this is it. We did it. And then the Great Recession hit, and I got a call from the buy side investment banker, and he was like, "Listen, the deal's off." I'm like, "Why is the deal off?" And he's like, "Well, I'm laid off, and the whole corporate purchase team is laid off, so there's no one doing the deals." And I was like, "Wow!" They just laid off everyone in their corporate acquisitions department. They're like, "No deals are happening." So obviously, we did not sell to Condé Nast in 2008, and that was partly why we had such a rough time, 2009 to 2012, because we just scaled up for hypergrowth. We looked like we're going to exit, and then the rug got yanked from under my feet. And that was a rough couple of years for me, and for the team really, who dealt with constant uncertainty and a pretty stressed out boss at times. So come 2012, we felt like the market had recovered. The site was going strong. And so we hired investment bankers again. And we talked to a bunch of different companies. And the one that ended up giving us the best deal was Defy Media. At the time, they were called Alloy Digital. They merged about 6 months later with Break Media to create Defy. So technically, it was Alloy Digital is who purchased us.
Yeah, because I was reading up. It's like you get bought by one company, it merges / taken over by a different company, and I think it might have gone even through another iteration after that. So years from 2012 to 2015 were those pretty good years? The Escapist. I imagine you have quite a few positive memories over there. I mean, running a video game site is really cool. Running a site you helped build from the ground up and is well beloved must be pretty awesome.
Yeah, they were great years. I mean, I was actually at Defy Media until I believe 2016, and I got promoted every year that I was at Defy Media. It was very funny. When I joined, I thought to myself, finally, I'm in my 30s now, and I'm finally going to see how big companies do business, and I'll learn, improvements to my operational skills, and I'll see how big companies do their finances. And then the president of the company sat me down. He's like, "You have the best run operation in this business. We need you to keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to give you some more stuff. And you have the tightest financials." I was like, "Oh shit, really? Me? My little shop?" So I got promoted every year. I went from running just the Escapist, then I was running the Escapist and a couple other gaming sites. Then I had the Escapist, and I had all of what was called the emerging brands. So that included our fashion sites, women's sites, girl.com, mommyish.com, a whole bunch. It was about 12 sites. And then I got promoted again, and then I got Addicting Games and shockwave.com put under me as well. And then I got promoted again, and I had break.com under me as well. And Break, by the time I left Break, I had grown that site to like 1 billion video views. It was astonishingly big. So yeah, it was awesome.
That is, I am learning all kinds of things. If I'm gonna be honest with Alex, I knew a fair amount about you before we ever talked online or whatever. But sometimes it's a little bit hard to do research on you, because one of the things that I found was like, okay, so I'm going to get ready for the interview with Alex Macris. So I look up your stuff, I read what I can, and it was like, oh, here's an interview from this one magazine, and then I click it, and it's gone, it's deleted. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
and that would happen over and over again. It's crazy because like you're really successful. Like seriously, that's not a subjective thing. You were a big success. You had incredible. You were ahead of the curve so often. You make big changes that worked. You found really talented people that, really changed the gaming space. It's just like success after success after success. And you try to look up Alex Macris today, and I'm not putting you down. You're still a fairly successful, pretty influential person in your own way. But it's like, it's just crazy to me. Like that someone could be that big and it's successful, do that well, and then all of a sudden they're like, you're just like deleted, you're gone. Like,
yeah. Well, that's the world we live in now.
It's crazy. So here comes the thing. This is the big controversy with Alex Macris. And again, this is like an area, if you're too uncomfortable, and you don't have to name anyone. I'm not interested in causing any trouble for anybody. So the big thing that happened in 2014, that if you followed gaming news for a while, was of course Gamergate, which is a complicated topic with pros and cons on both sides of it. It is such a complicated thing unto itself. But basically, it started out of a push where there's concerns about ethics in gaming from some people, that game developers and game journalists were basically there was a feedback cycle. Like they would continually help each other, and it made gamers feel like the information was useful. And at the same time, there were these articles like "gamers are awful" or "gamers are dead." That's the famous one, Kotaku. And so it became this like became this big thing, and people were pushing back. And then of course, then there was the antis. And then for a while, it felt like in gaming media, it's like if you said things like "I like Gamergate," God forbid, or even you say like let's not blow these people off, let's give them a chance, like Eric Kane. wrote at Forbes. And the person that Eric came when he wrote that at Forbes was you. Do you want to talk about what happened at Gamergate and how that affected Escapist? And
Sure. So I think the thing to understand is that Gamergate doesn't happen in a vacuum. It actually emerges from two trends. Three trends, actually. And it's going to take a minute to explain them. So the first trend, and this is much more obvious in retrospect than it was to most people at the time, but the first trend is the increasing political polarization of the American people. And most people in 2014 hadn't really grasped how things were going to be, let's say, by the time we get to 2018, 2019, the resistance, not my president, etc. But the writing was on the wall even back then that this political polarization was coming. So let's call that's factor one. Then the second factor is that video games, every generation, are getting more expensive in order to keep up with improvements in graphics. Well, when a video game gets more expensive, you have two choices. You can raise the price or you can get a bigger audience. And if you control for inflation, the price of video games has not really risen very much. So in order to stay profitable, the video game companies have to get bigger audiences. They have to, right? They have to steer the games towards the mainstream, or they can provide B-tier games for niches. Okay, those are their only two options. All right, and then the third thing that's changed is within the media landscape. People no longer go to the written word to get their editorial opinions. They now turn to video and podcasts. And they look to influencers like PewDiePie. They don't feel like they need to look at game journalists to tell them which games to buy because there are user ratings on all of the sites. And there are free demos that you can download. And there are Twitch streams that show you the game being played, all of which are far more effective at telling you whether or not you want to play this game than reading someone's review. So this puts all of the established gaming sites into a very difficult conundrum. The audience that the game companies want to reach is no longer the audience they have, and the audience they have no longer wants to read the content they write. So what do? And purely from leaving aside the political factor, which was a factor, but leaving that aside, many of them made a rational decision that we are going to steer into cultural criticism, right? So we are going to become cultural critics of gaming to help it become more mainstream. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that. And I think a lot of great sites could be built on that. We're built on that. But it created a terrible mismatch between what the gamers were coming to the site to get and what they were getting. And the gamers were already feeling somewhat attacked because with every new generation of game, the games were becoming more sort of mainstream accessible. But that, from a hardcore gamer's point of view, that always means dumbed down, not as intense, not as challenging. Like, for instance, if you compare the original XCOM to the XCOM that came out recently, the original XCOM, you had almost no limit to how many soldiers you could field. You could have 20 guys and the battles could take 10 hours to fight because you're moving 20 little guys around. The new XCOM comes out, you're limited to 4 because it makes it faster and it's more mainstream accessible, etc. So the gamers are already upset that the games are becoming more mainstream accessible because by definition, it means they're not being catered to. Now, the journalists are also turning away from them. And so and then you throw in the political polarization, and it just created the situation for a nuclear conflagration. Now, where am I sitting? So at this point, I'm not running the Escapist as my day-to-day job. I'm running a portfolio of sites that is doing about 2 billion video views a year. It's a huge portfolio of sites. It's a $20 million business, of which the Escapist is just a tiny little bit. And from my point of view, I have a site for moms. I have a site for people that like movies called Screen Junkies. I have a site for men's comedy called Break. I have a site for casual gamers called Shockwave. I have all these different websites I'm running. The Escapist is my site for core gamers. That's its place in the portfolio. And so I said, no, guys, we're not going to shift away from appealing to core gamers with the Escapist. We're strong in video, which is where we need to be. We have video influencers like PewDiePie on our team because we have guys like Yahtzee Crowshaw. We are strong there, so there's no reason for us to shift away from that space. And that, so that ends up us aligning with, quote, the gamer faction and the struggle. And it got real ugly real fast.
So from my memory, though, your approach to it wasn't, you weren't like pro Gamergate. I mean, that would, some people might say that, but that just isn't true. At best, this is an exaggeration.
We were pro gamer.
Yeah, and you were basically like, you can tell me if I have it wrong. You were just like, we just shouldn't take all these people and just throw them under the bus. Like we should, from your perspective, it's like, one, it's not helpful, okay, because that's only going to hurt our business. You're just going to turn it. No one goes to the burger shop. Everyone's done this parable, stunned to death. But if you don't go to the McDonald's and then you buy your Big Mac and then the guy insults you, you're like, why are you buying that, fatty? What are you doing? You're like, okay, fine, I won't buy it. I'm never coming back. It's just bad business. On the other hand, your background in geekery, gamers they're just basically normal people. They're not. I don't think they're any more or less toxic than general population.
Oh, they're not more toxic than normal. No, I mean, by far the most toxic sites I saw in terms of sheer nastiness were much more like the fashion sites and things like that. Gamer toxicity was not particularly high relative to other websites. It's just they were under the microscope.
Is there any, like, what am I missing? What was your intention there when you try to broach the topic on the site?
Well, so what happened was the first thing that happened was that there was a push from other journalists to tell the Escapist what we could and couldn't talk about on our website and what our users could and couldn't talk about on our website. And I've politically always been a libertarian, and we had a forum that was relatively free speech. It had some moderation, but it was relatively uncensored. And all of a sudden there was this push that, no, you have to censor the gamers. They're not allowed to talk about this. You should ban them. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't work for you. You're our competitors. You're not our masters, and we're just not going to do that. And but then that led to a big split because about half of the team that worked for the Escapist ended up thinking to themselves, actually, I'm on the other side here. And I get it. Like, look, from their point of view, they're young game journalists. They want to have a career in the game journalistic space. The average game journalist changes jobs every year to 2 years. So maybe they're going to be with the Escapist another 12 months, 24 months. Then they're going to try and go to IGN or Games Radar or GameSpot. Like, everybody moves around. And so I think it's a really rational thing for them to do. They think to themselves, if the Escapist gets viewed as against where game journalists are, then it's going to damage my ability to get work. So I should get ahead of that and jump out. And a lot of them did. And I'm sure for some of them it was politically motivated, but I think for some of them it was just literally self-interest. And I don't really have an issue with someone pursuing their rational self-interest. Same with like the sites. Like, if you want to say gamers are dead, go ahead and do that. Steer to a new audience. It's fine. You're just not my competitor anymore. I'm okay with that. Where I took issue was the notion that every game had to be for everyone and every game site had to be for everyone, that everything had to be for everyone. I said, no. There should be things for everyone. There should be games for everyone. There should be websites for everyone, but not every game needs to be for everyone. Not every website needs to be for everyone. And I use the analogy of cars. I think you could use a lot of analogies, but if you look at cars, people that drive Volvos are different than the people that drive Ford pickup trucks or Jeep Wranglers. Jeep Wrangler has a whole marketing campaign that's based on patriotism and American values. And they do special editions that look like old U.S. military Jeeps. You go to a Volvo buyer or a Subaru buyer, and you're like, do you want your Volvo to look like a U.S. military vehicle? They're going to think you're crazy, right? Like, it's just a totally different mindset. Or what a person wants from a Corvette and what they want from a station wagon. And the car industry understands that. They segment consumers, and they have a car for everybody, but not every car is for everybody. And that was essentially the thesis of what I wrote on the site. It's like, look, we should have games for everybody, but not everything needs to be for everybody.
No, I agree. That's completely sensible. I mean, video games it's a medium, right? It's just good. It's good. It's not really a genre. It's a medium, and all kinds of things can be a medium. Like go to the movies. Not every movie is for every person.
Exactly. So at that point, we lost probably half our talent, which was a big setback for the site. And so the folks up at Defy Media kind of looked at what was going on, and they looked at how toxic Gamergate had been, like, because it was spilling over everywhere. And they just decided to pull the plug on the Escapist, so they shut it down. Now, I didn't lose my job. They just moved me to Beverly Hills. So I just worked out of the Beverly Hills office and continued to run this enormous $20 million media empire for them. It was just literally, they were like, well, if game journalists don't want to cater to the gamer audience, we don't really want to have game journalists. So goodbye. I was like, what could I say, right? Like half my team had just left over this very topic. I knew that was what was going to happen, right? Because it's a portfolio company where you have a website for different niches, and if you destroy your niche, then they're just going to shut you down. And I knew that was going to happen, and that was what happened. I tried to stop it, and I failed.
Okay, so you're at Defy, and you work at Defy till, you said, how long? So
mid 2016, yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I got promoted again after Gamergate. It did not end my career. It certainly made me unpopular among many circles in the video game space, but at that point I was only earning, a fraction of my business was in the video game space. My primary focus at that point was in men's comedy, where we were having tremendous success. So what happened there was I got put in charge of the site called Break that had been languishing for several years. It used to be huge, then it got small. They gave it to me and they said, can you turn this around? And so I hit on this idea that Break was going to be the Fox News of comedy. So I said, let's let everybody else target the coastal elite. Let's let them target the big cities, and let's steer our commentary, our posts, our topics. Let's steer it straight into like raunchy Midwest, drinks beers, like Big's boobs, drives a pickup truck. That's our guy. And we're going to be the only comedy site that's going to cater to them. And we blew up. I mean, if you look at the traffic line, it just goes like this. It was a classic hockey stick. Suddenly, my little division at Break was doing more video traffic than the entirety of Defy Media put together. And so I thought to myself, well, this is amazing. Like, this is, obviously I was right. There was an underserved market here, and, big win. And at which point I got my final performance review from Defy Media, and they told me that my editorial values were not in line, my editorial sensibilities were not in line with the company's values. And I said, what are your values? Failing? And so I didn't get demoted. I didn't lose my job, but it just was clear that was as high as I was going to get in the company. Like I had poisoned the well for myself because they had decided that, I didn't share their values. So I left.
We're not going to push you out, but you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
So I left. I get the message.
And ironically, not like a year later, Defy Media went out of business. So I was right. They were on the path to failure. So.
Yeah, that sucks. So eventually, so that's for you and that stuff parted. Yeah. The Escapist does eventually, they get bought by someone else, and it does get resurrected just a few years ago, right?
It does. It got resurrected. They initially brought back my old acquisitions editor, and he ran the site. And he and I had fallen out. He doesn't hold much regard for me anymore. So when he took over the site, I think he tried very hard to distance itself from me as a very deliberate tactic. And I think that was partly as well to try and avoid cancellation and reopening old wounds and things like that. But, unfortunately for him, he failed, and he ended up himself getting canceled and lost his job. And so then they brought in new management that was entirely unconnected to the old company, and that they've run it successfully since. It's really nice to be able to go on the web and still see the Escapist up there. It makes me feel good every day.
Nice. Yeah, the YouTube part never really ended. The Yahtzee and the rest, they kept doing their thing.
That's right.
So it wasn't like the brand was totally dead. Like we saw with G4 TV, which all that, as of this recording, we just found out yesterday, that one is just totally kaput. They're not even going to try to push it out a few more months. It's just done. So that kind of, I'm sure that definitely helped. Yeah, it is weird because it always is strange when someone has such an influence at like a site and it's like, where did all his stuff go? I remember it being here yesterday and it's gone, which sucks.
All the stuff I wrote under pseudonyms is still on there. So I still find tons of my content on the Escapist. It's just the stuff I wrote under pseudonyms back when we didn't have a large staff and we needed to make it look like we had more writers than we did. So a ton of the writing that's on there is my writing. It's just nobody knows.
That is interesting. Okay, now
I'm not going to say who it is because why.
And that would take away the mystery if you wanted to go to the Escapist, try to figure out which of this content was by Alex. I don't know. Do you have positive or better feelings about where game journalism is now than when you started the Escapist or when you left? Like, do you see any improvements, or have things gotten worse, or the state about the same? What are your feelings about game journalism in general these days?
I haven't paid attention to it at all since I left, so I can't even comment. It was something I had put my life into for a really long time, and so people have this view of me that I'm like this very politically charged figure. What they don't understand is I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. If I wanted to go into politics, if I wanted to work in that arena, I could have done so. Any NGO in the world would have given me a job. Any political consultancy in the world, I could have run for office. That entire menu of options was open to me. I didn't do that because I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was work in the world of nerd culture, and I wanted to build gaming into something awesome, and I wanted to create a better gamer culture. And so it was terrible for me come to 2014, 2015, 2016. And it's like, holy crap, my whole life, I wanted to see games go mainstream. I wanted to see gamer culture become cool. And now games have gone mainstream and gamer culture is just getting rejected as toxic. And it was kind of devastating. So, and it was very strange for me to have people come at me like I was this avid political figure when, it had never really been about that for me. That said, I think I got a little bit radicalized by that experience. But that tends to be what happens when you go through the ringer like that.
Yeah, definitely. That is such a frustrating area. I agree. It is hard because I'm not too much younger than you, I think. It is weird because even when I was young in high school, even beginning to starting to college, there definitely was a division between those who are interested in nerdy stuff in general and those who weren't. And some of those stereotypes are completely ridiculous, but a few of them were correct, or they commonly happened. And it's like I wish everyone was as into Iron Man as I was. And then the monkey's paw curls, and then everyone is as interested in Iron Man as you are. And it's like, maybe that wasn't something I should have.
Yeah, I've had a lot of monkey's paws in my life, let me tell you. Yeah.
Okay, so you decide, okay, not really welcome in doing the media game, so you decide to pivot and you work on tabletop, which is something you've always had a passion for. What inspired you to feel like tabletop was the way to go? And I mean, I want to talk about some of your projects, especially Ascendant, because that's the one I do know of.
Yeah, well, there was an interlude in between of about 6 months where I worked for a right-wing political company, and that turned out to be an absolutely dreadful experience. So I got out of that very quickly. So that was a weird time in my life as well.
I have heard that, but I didn't know if I was going to ask or not because it seemed like to go by so quick. Was that stuff? Someone was saying that was sort of attached to what Milo Yiannopoulos is doing, and this, of course, is before Milo like just completely implodes. There was this hot minute where Milo was really popular and so many people, and this is like, you got to remember when this is happening on YouTube, it was cool to be edgy.
Yeah, exactly. So I get approached, it's 2016, I'm leaving Define. I get approached, by the investors, and they're like, listen, we're putting together a media company. We have this really, really hot star who is, he's going to be the keynote speaker at CPAC. Everyone loves him. His YouTube following is huge. His Twitter following is huge. We want you to head up this business, and make him, the right-wing equivalent of politically incorrect. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. I've built online websites. I've managed talent. Like, this is within my wheelhouse. And so I took the gig, and then just everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Everything that could implode. Everything terrible that could happen happened. And so by 6 months in, I was no longer on payroll, and then 6 months later after that, I had formally resigned. So,
and that is the problem with being a risk taker. Sometimes they do not pan out.
I'm like intelligence 18, wisdom 7. What can you do?
Okay, so speaking of character stats, so you love tabletop. So that's where you went to next, right?
Yeah, it was. So I had been playing tabletop literally since I was 5 years old. I wrote a tabletop column at The Escapist called Arbiter of Worlds about how to be a game master. Have run role-playing games every week of my life, basically since 2004. So a lot of time, like 10,000 hours. I meant like 100,000 hours of expertise. Slight exaggeration there. So while all this is going on, all this other stuff is happening, my wife became disabled with mitochondrial disease and becomes bedridden and homebound. And so I find myself with a need to be home a lot, but with lots of downtime because she is asleep and not feeling well and can't really go out. And I'm like, well, what do I do? I mean, I'm sitting here at home being quiet. I have to be nearby in case she needs me, so I can't go out. Can't really have friends over. Like, what do I do? She's like, honey, have you ever thought about maybe you should do some writing? You've written so much fun stuff for your friends. Maybe you should write. I thought that's a good idea. And so, I started Autark with a couple friends, and we started doing tabletop role-playing games together. And it was good timing because Kickstarter had just become a thing. And so we were able to raise funds on Kickstarter to launch the game. And it was in the moment when 4E was at its peak of dissatisfaction and 5E hadn't come out yet. So there was a market for some alternatives. And so we had a good first launch, and I built it from there. So today I run Autark and its sister company, Ascendant Comics. And I have essentially 2 intellectual properties. Adventurer Conquer King is my fantasy system, and Ascendant is my superhero system. And Ascendant has a whole associated comic book line with it. In the Ascendant universe, our first comic book, first graphic novel, Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron, just crowdfunded, and it's going to be in bookstores next year.
Was learning to write fiction, was that a hard leap for you, or was it like a natural evolution from your nonfiction work and of course just the Dungeon Master gamery that you already...
Oh, it was really easy. I've always been blessed to be very gifted with words, so it was very easy. I found actually comic book writing was the easiest fiction writing I've done because the experience of writing a comic book is so similar to being a dungeon master. Because when you write a comic book script, you're not writing it for the reader. You're writing the comic book script for the artist and letterer. And so you're telling the artist what she sees that she needs to draw, which is exactly what you're doing as a game master. You're telling the players what they see, and then they fill it in their head. And so essentially, all I had to do was for each page, picture it in my mind as if I was a game master telling the players what they see, write that down, and then the audience, the artist brings it to life. And so it was the most natural sort of writing I've ever done. It was a breeze. It was a joy. And I was very fortunate as well to make friends with a fellow named David Campetti, who's been a long-time writer in the industry for 30 years. And so he gave me just like so much valuable information about the techniques, how to lay out your script, mistakes, when to use a reference image, how to do sound effects. Like, it was like this awesome professional tutor. And so the combination made it an easy thing to do. Novel writing, I find, is much harder. I've never published a novel. I have a few I've worked on, but novel writing, I find, is much more difficult than game writing or comic writing. For me, there are other people that feel very different, but that's for me.
Are you happy with the tables? Tabletop is another one that's gone. It has obviously not as popular as gaming, but in some ways it has had a bit of a renaissance. Maybe not with like hardcore tabletop players, but with people who, forgive the term, normies, a lot of Gen Z millennial gals. We can blame probably Critical Role for that. Are you happy with it? I mean, Wizard of the Coast, for example, as much good as they sometimes do, it feels like they are constantly just trying to cover their flank, and they're just always mired in stupid, ridiculous controversies. Like, what was the most recent one where they got in trouble in one of their books? They had a throwback character from the Gygax science fiction series, and they were supposed to be like Wizard of Oz flying monkeys, and then people in me are like, "Oh, you're talking about black people," because that's what normal people think of when they see a monkey.
Yeah, and so
I want to point out, so the audio listeners, I'm rolling my eyes, maybe even pop out of my head. If you see a fictional monkey or an ape character and you think that is the black person next door, it's not the writer that has the problem. It's probably you. All right, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the tabletop game space has absolutely had a renaissance. It's hugely grown. And in many ways, they're now encountering the same problems that video games did 7 years ago, which is, in order to maintain that growth, they have to go into the mainstream. And the mainstream in America and in Europe is exceptionally politically divided, highly partisan. All of our social media where we talk about things is highly partisan. And so it puts anyone who's trying to be the dominant player and reach the widest crowd has a really tough time ahead of them. And so as a creator who's operating at a much smaller scale, I have been blessed to be able to say, I don't care. I am making games that I like. I'm making comics that I like. If you like them too, that's great. If you don't like them, that's no problem. You have so many other options, so many other companies to choose from. It's great. What a beautiful world we live in, where you have your choice of content. And so I just let it go. Like, I don't get involved in those debates. I don't really care what anyone has to say about my creative content, other than the people that are my fans, that I speak to daily, that I talk about, hey guys, what new product would you like? What new features should I add? Things like that. The rest just doesn't matter. Wizards probably doesn't have that luxury. They're publicly traded, and their CEO is under pressure to show growth year over year, and so they're gonna have these problems. But every company is having those problems. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, someone is going to get politically upset about it nowadays.
Could in the future, would you ever be coaxed back to trying some of these things you tried before, like media? Is there a potential alternative timeline where someone comes here like, Alex, we want to start the next conservative gaming site, or I want to make like the most popular tabletop news or review site there's ever been? Do you think they could get you to coax you back, and you're just
no? Partly for the reason I said earlier, the money. The money's just not there. There's too much free content available, and Google and Facebook have swallowed all of the advertising budget. No one advertises direct anymore. They either do purchase on Google, they purchase on Facebook, or they do what's called programmatic advertising, where you simply go to a network and you say, this is the sort of person I want to reach, and then the ads just show up wherever. And so, whereas when we ran The Escapist, we had direct relationships with clients who were coming to us because of our audience, because of our brand, because they wanted to be associated with that. All of that is gone, and it's just an online auction house. So I have a good friend who's one of the most talented salespeople I've ever met in my life, and he spent most of his career doing online ad sales, and was basically the reason The Escapist stayed in business as long as it did. And he left the online ad space. He sells enterprise software now, because there's just there's no money to be made. So I'm like, if the best salesperson I've ever met in my life can't do it, I just don't think it can be done. I think the new model for media is going to be more individual creators working in small teams with hybrid models using subscription, things like that. And I should add that the fact that individual creators can now go out and start their own Substack or their own Twitch channel and get subscription revenue also has had a huge impact on media companies, because, part of the reason you would want to read, let's say, Newsweek was because of the George Will column. But if George Will thinks to himself, well, screw Newsweek, I'll just go start a Substack and, connect the big subscription dollars. Well, what is Newsweek going to do? Because every guy who's like George Will can do that. And so I think that makes it harder. And that has contributed greatly to the sort of dumbing down and genericization that we've seen in content. So I think media has a bleak future ahead of it. I would not want to be an investor in a media company right now. No.
I agree with your analysis as far as I can see it. The changing space plus like AI, I'm seeing all these things that AI, like was it GPT-3, which is OpenAI's writing program, and it's crazy. It's like, you're like, wow. It makes me feel like there's like no job is almost going to be safe. At least no artistic job is going to be safe from AI taking over.
Right.
Right. I wish media handled things differently. There are all kinds of gripes, I think, where they could do differently or do better. But you are right that, look, at the end of the day, it's dollars to donuts, and the money isn't there. And basically, we have all these people scrambling over, a life raft that just gets smaller and smaller. It's Larry Correa, who I talked to recently. It's like you're on this. You're all like on the deck of the Titanic, and you're playing musical chairs.
Yeah. It's very much.
It's frustrating. So, really appreciate you coming on the show, Alex. What are you working on now? What goals do you have for your life and your family, your career?
Right now I'm working on the Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron sequel. I have a publishing deal with Baen Books, so the comic books are going to go out into bookstores, which is really exciting. I'm working on the Ascendant Platinum Edition. So the first printing of Ascendant completely sold out. We hit #1 on Drive-Thru RPG. We sold out all of our stock. We hit Platinum bestseller. It was very exciting. So I'm going to be doing a re-release of Ascendant with a second printing and the first source book. That'll be out probably next month, 45 days. Then after that, I'm working on something called the Adventurer Conqueror King System Imperial Imprint, or AXE-II, which amuses me. And that's going to be not quite a second edition of Axe, but a compilation of a lot of the Axioms articles and source books and things like that into a revised core rules. So I don't call it a second edition because it's going to be backwards compatible with everything that's written. But it'll be certainly a more up-to-date reference because the core book is now 11 years old. So that's my immediate future. Long term, I've been building a bunker, been buying a lot of food, storing up a lot of water, storing up a lot of ammunition. And I think when the nuclear war comes, I'll be ready. So,
Okay. Are you one of those people that comes out here to South Dakota and buys like a bunker that used to be like a military base or something?
I totally would have. It just didn't work out. But yeah, I would have been that guy. Yeah. So yeah, no, sadly, no missile silo currently in my property holdings. Very sad.
I imagine they're hard to get hold of, but what I know. Well, thank you so much for Alex for coming on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the readers? Where can we find you at?
Yeah, sure. So you can find us at autarkemporium.com. That's our store. Autark.co is the main website. It's autarch.co and autarkemporium.com. I'm also on Twitter at, my handle is Archon, and then we also have Autark and Ascendant Comics on Twitter too. So, pretty easy to find. It's just hard to find nice things about me.
Well, Alex is great. You should definitely follow his stuff. Check out the Ascendant Comics. Check out the Autark role-playing tabletop books in game. I hear it's very good. If that is something you're into, you should definitely check it out. And thank you, Alex, for coming on. I really appreciate it. When I started this podcast project, I was like, who are the who are like the top 5 people I wish I could have a one-on-one conversation, talk to. And you were on that list, and you agreed
That's awesome.
generously. So thank you. All right. Awesome. Well, listeners, thank you for being here with us on CultureScape. Wish you guys all the best of luck. Until next time, take care.